Have you ever had a conversation with someone and felt like they weren't listening? Like maybe they didn't even care about what you had to say? Not so long ago, life was a bit like that for women in Canada. They weren't allowed to vote. And if they spoke out and voiced their opinions, they could even be sent to jail. It was a time when women had more fear and less freedom, more rules and fewer rights. But 5 courageous Albertan women came together and changed it all. How, you might ask? Over a cup of tea. That's right, a cup of tea. But more on that in a minute. Almost 100 years ago, Emily Murphy, Irene Parlby, Nellie McClung, Louise McKinney, and Henrietta Muir Edwards were fed up with the way things were. Emily Murphy was the first female magistrate in Canada and wanted to be appointed to the Senate. But since she was a woman, she wasn't eligible. The law at the time said it was a position for persons, a word which somehow didn't include women. The women who would become known as the Famous Five set out to change that. But since women were strongly discouraged from getting together and talking about politics, the Famous Five set up what they called pink teas. The name was a great disguise. People assumed that they were just having dainty tea parties, but in reality, they were planning their strategy to move forward gender equality in Canada. All the planning and work that occurred during the pink teas led to the Famous Five's first petition to the Supreme Court of Canada. It was not to be that easy. Their petition was rejected. But they weren't giving up. They decided to approach the highest possible court authority at the time, the Privy Council of England. And on October 18th, 1929, an amazing thing happened. The Famous Five's petition led to the ruling that women were included as persons under law. These 5 courageous women changed the course of history in Canada and the Commonwealth and paved the way for women to be considered equal in all aspects of life. Generations later, their actions continue to inspire Canadian women to be ambitious, adventurous, and famous. Today, the Famous Five Foundation works to create a society where every voice is heard, valued, and has the power to challenge and conquer injustice.
Well, thank you to the Famous Five and their wonderful personal case. Welcome, everyone, today. So glad you're with us on a Famous Five Friday. It's a day when women have more power, see more opportunities, and seize those opportunities. We appreciate you chatting in the chat room and hope you will continue to connect with old friends and meet new friends and tell us what's on your mind. And of course, after the virtual pink tea today, we're inviting you to come to a question and answer called the Après Pink Tea, which you should have received a separate link in your inbox, or you can just simply click on the chat room's link that's there and join us just for half an hour. So hopefully after your experience at this pink tea, you will realize that you're needed too, that your leadership is needed and it's important to be the person that you were meant to be. Today, let's start our program with our land acknowledgement as we begin a month of the National Indigenous History Month. So our land acknowledgement, your land acknowledgements, says that you are a treaty person too, and that you want to figure out how best we can all live together, how we can all build Canada together. And on August the 12th, our virtual pink tea will focus on 3 generations of Indigenous women, and particularly a woman who changed the Indian Act so that Indian women regained their status, as did their children. So that's on August the 12th. The Famous Five Foundation has benefited from many partnerships over the years, and one has lasted for nearly 20 years, and that's our partnership with Enbridge, who are our presenting sponsor for today's event and who have been a sponsor of a number of our other programs. Normally, a spokesperson for Enbridge introduces the panelists, but for the very first time, we have the pleasure of having a representative from Enbridge participate on our panel, and that's Michelle George, and you will meet her in just a moment. And so instead, we've asked one of the famous 5 directors, Kelly Patolis, to do the introduction. We were really thrilled when Kelly said yes last November she would join the organization, be on the board of directors, and indeed be the chair for the 95th anniversary of the Persons Case, which will happen on October 18th, 2024. So Kelly is an award-winning account director at Allstream. Allstream is a supplier, I must read this so I get this correct, a supplier of business voice, collaboration, connectivity, and managed IT solutions, a major North American company. Having been a top 40, under 40, just a few years ago, it doesn't come as a surprise that Kelly has already earned a place in the President's Club at Allstream. We were thrilled when she joined the board and said, yes, I will help with the 95th. And so I'd now like to turn the program over to Kelly, and I'll be back just a little later. So thank you very much for coming. We'll see you later. Bye-bye. Over to Kelly.
Thank you, Frances. It is my pleasure to introduce our fascinating panel today. Michelle George earned a combined degree for both civil engineering and management. After graduating from McMaster, Michelle has worked for various energy companies and now is the VP of New Energy Technologies at Enbridge. Michelle continues to grow her professional expertise and serves on the Industrial Advisory Council for McMaster's Engineering and Management program. Michelle enjoys being the mother of 2 young adults and being walked by her 2 dogs, Bella and Max. Like Michelle, Tina Ackermans prepared for her current position as a VP by earning a commerce degree from Concordia and graduating from UWO's Ivy Management program. Tina's responsibilities at Suncor now focus on strategy and corporate development, including mergers and acquisitions, as well as wind and solar projects. This new Calgarian is an avid sports fan and is quite eager to attend live events. Tina acknowledges that she and her spouse are not always the boss at home because they have 3 dogs. Guiding the conversation today is Katie Smith-Parent. This dynamic young woman is the Business Development Officer for Spartan Controls. In addition, she is helping to lead Young Women in Energy, an organization with 4,500 members. Katie is also the co-founder of Access Connects, a resource hub in Calgary for women's initiatives and organizations. The Alberta Chamber of Resources recently recognized her as their Young Resource Leader for 2021. She was also recently recognized by She Innovates Alberta. Katie is currently pursuing her MBA in Executive Management at Royal Roads University. Here's to an energizing, inspiring conversation. Katie, it's all yours. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Hi, everyone, and thank you so much for having us. Thank you to Frances for that excellent land acknowledgement. I don't know if everyone can see on screen, but I have my moccasin earrings that I purchased a few weeks ago from an amazing Indigenous craft fair here in Calgary. But I know that there's so many events going on in the country this month, so I really hope that everyone checks something out, learn and unlearn all the things that we can to improve our relationship with Indigenous people in Canada. We look forward today to having a very fulsome discussion about women and the energy sector, a topic very near and dear to my heart. Working in it, I think the 3 of us know that the energy sector is never boring. And women like Tina and Michelle are leading the new evolution that's just beginning. So why don't we kick it off and let's go back to the beginning and talk about your journey to now. So maybe you could share with the audience a little bit about where you grew up and kind of your journey till now. Maybe Tina, I'll go for you first.
Sure. Thanks so much, Katie. I grew up in Montreal. I'm part of a family of four. I have just one sibling, a younger sister, who, interestingly enough, for today's topics, is also working in the energy industry. And our career paths, while very different, have actually brought us geographically in very similar locations. And she too lives presently in Calgary, which is where I am now based. I'm a graduate, as was mentioned in the introduction. I'm a graduate of Concordia University. I majored in marketing and minored in business law, was convinced that I would follow down the path of law and become a lawyer. But quite honestly, once I got into the business world and working in the energy industry, never found the driver to want to leave and change course. So I've stayed on very much that path. And while I majored in marketing, I can only say that in my career, I've probably spent 2 years in something that I would call really a marketing role, but have leveraged certainly those studies many times over in more indirect ways. I was recruited straight from university to Petro-Canada. Petro-Canada subsequently merged together with Suncor in the late 2000s, so around 2009. And I started with the company in our retail operations organization. I've now worked for Petro-Canada Suncor for over 25 years, which dates me very quickly. Time flies, I guess, when you're having fun. And I was doing a quick count. I guess I've had the opportunity to have about 15 different roles through in different parts of the organization. Everything from retail operations to convenience retailing, to my brief stint in marketing, some time in wholesale operations, in sales, spent some time in our lubricants organization, supply trading, and optimization. I've led now our renewable energy business for the last 3 years. And more recently, in the last 2 years, also incorporated our strategy and corporate development portfolio. We've had a chance to relocate 6 times, and thanks very much to my supportive partner, my spouse, Kirk, who's been willing to make some sacrifices in his career that have enabled me to take advantage of some of the opportunities that have presented me to live in 4 different cities with multiple relocations. And I guess I was reflecting in some conversations that Francis and I had recently. I've had the opportunity to spend time for work in every province across the country in Canada. So happy to see that we probably have folks from so many of those provinces with us today. So that's been a little bit my journey, Katie. And while I know Michelle and I have some similarities, I know we've got tons of differences as well. So maybe I'll turn it over to Michelle.
Absolutely.
Thanks very much. And thanks for having me here today to join this amazing panel. Enbridge really values our partnership with the Famous Five, and I appreciate being here to talk about women in energy. Because I think you will find there's a lot of similarities and differences with Tina and I. I've also been in the energy industry for a very long time, for 27 years. And this is a great question, though. Let's start at the beginning, right? So I grew up in Kitchener, Ontario with my parents and my one sibling, older sister, where my parents still live in the house I grew up in. So we didn't move around much. My husband grew up in Waterloo, which is essentially the same city. And only if you're from Kitchener-Waterloo do you differentiate between them. But it was a great place to grow up, and we have lots of family and friends there, so we still visit a lot. And that we now live in Aurora with our kids and our dogs. I'm an engineer, and I will say growing up, I didn't have any family members or friends that were in engineering. But in high school, I was really good at math and science, particularly physics, and I really enjoyed them. So I started telling people I was going to be an engineer. And I would always get, I would often get the good for you reaction. But I started to notice that it was either good for you, way to go, or really a girl in engineering, good for you. As if, are you really going to make it? And so that made me want to do it more. And I did end up taking a combined engineering business degree, the engineering management degree at McMaster. And while I was there, I got a summer co-op job at the gas utility in Waterloo called Union Gas at the time, which is now part of Enbridge. And I'll never forget my first day. after 15 minutes of safety training, things have changed a lot in the industry since then, I was sent out to a distribution construction site where the inspector on the job would test engineering students to see if we could admit that we didn't know something. And he said to me, I want you to stake out the running line a meter off property. And I looked at him and I said, I understand the words, but I have no idea what you're saying. And so he really appreciated me saying that. And we were fast friends. And after that, and I was approved to work on the construction jobs all summer. And I loved it. And I ended up getting hired full-time when I graduated. And now, even though the company name has changed several times, so it may look like I've been with different companies, it's really been the same company for over 27 years. And I promise I'm not going to share every day of those years with you. I've spent most of my career in technical roles, field operations, engineering, and major projects, construction of pipelines and compressor stations, typically very male-dominated environments. And in my last role, I was back at the Ontario Utility as VP Engineering, amalgamating the two largest natural gas utilities in Canada with accountability for engineering, asset management, integrity, construction, and some of the operations. And then about 6 months ago, I moved into my current role, which is the Vice President of New Energy Technologies, which is an awesome job. My team and I get to bring our low carbon commitments to life with innovative projects and new low carbon energies. And it's very strategic, and it includes both the technical and the commercial aspects of our investments. So that's where I am now.
Oh, I love that. So I'm really curious because it sounds like both of you got recruited out of university to work in the energy industry. Was that like with a marketing and an engineering background, you really could have worked in any industry. So I'm curious, did you always want to work in the energy industry, or what drew you to that? And maybe you could talk a little bit about that. Maybe I'll go back to Tina.
To be honest, for me, it was more accidental than intentional, I think I would say. I was recruited through on-campus recruiting. Admittedly, there were a few participants in the energy industry that were doing on-campus recruiting. They probably recruited more heavily in the engineering, disciplines, but they were hiring a handful of business graduates as well. And actually I was in Montreal at the time. That's where, that is where I grew up. And the energy industry isn't overly present, to be honest, in Montreal. And so landing in an energy industry role was rather unusual compared to my peer group. Most of my friends went into banking, pharmaceuticals, packaged goods, some of the consulting companies, and so on. But I got a great offer for a role that quite honestly promised a lot of variety. It was, as I mentioned earlier, it was in our retail operations role. I was, my very first role, I was a territory manager for Petro-Canada, calling on our retail service stations that at that time were very much service bay, like mechanic type locations. I started in a rural geography and territory outside of Montreal. Quite honestly, you pulled into most of these locations. It was the ding ding as you drove over the line that alerted a service attendant or guest attendant that you were there, and a lot of the sites were still full serve. And so I've had an opportunity to see the industry change over that time. But I will admit, it was a great starting salary. And the fact that I had an offer for a company car in that very first role got me started. I didn't know a lot about the energy industry, but I've learned a whole lot in the last 25 years for sure.
Wow. And especially with an integrated company like Suncor, you really can, see the whole business. That's amazing. Michelle, how about you?
In some ways, very similar. I would say it was a little bit by accident. It was campus recruiting, starting with that co-op job. And, honestly, I took a job and I found a career. I was not looking for a forever job at the time. Same thing. It was a great opportunity. I really did enjoy working there, but I wasn't sure how long I'd stay at one company or in one industry because I like change. I value continued learning and development. And I didn't know if it would be available, but, I've been fortunate. Very similar to Tina. I've had a lot of variety in my career over the years. I've had 16 roles. I've moved my family 6 times, and that's been sort of all over Ontario. We had a stint in Houston too, and worked in 3 different Enbridge businesses. So, there's lots of different opportunities in the industry. And, what I realized early on is I can continue to learn and grow and experience all kinds of change and develop my broad skills within the same company.
Oh, absolutely. So I really like, my next question is really like, why do you stay? And I think that some of it is that variety, but maybe you could comment a bit on, why have you stayed for this long? Because you must have seen so much change during this time of just the industry as a whole, but then you'll also the companies that you both are with. Maybe you can comment a little bit on that.
Sure. Michelle, you want to go first this time?
Sure, absolutely. Okay, yeah. So, I said the energy industry, lots of opportunities to learn and advance, lots of change. And what I do at Enbridge right now goes, well beyond oil and gas. So in new energies, it's my job to develop low carbon energy sources like renewable natural gas, hydrogen, carbon capture and storage, all of which are critical to enabling the energy transition. And I'm also really proud to be part of the larger lower carbon team at Enbridge that includes our renewable power business, including solar and wind. I think it's an amazing time to be working in the energy industry right now. The urgency to cut emissions and transition to low carbon economy is intense. The demand for energy is increasing. We're experiencing another energy crisis. And it's resulting in spectacular innovation on all kinds of fronts. And we've got the technology, we've got the people, and we have the will to get it done.
Oh, great.
So many similarities for sure. I think, obviously the variety, the opportunities and the variety in both our careers sounds like it's been endless. I reflect often that to be able to do the variety of roles that I've had, most individuals would have to have left organizations and started over, numerous times. Instead, I've been able, to build on a reputation and get longevity with one employer, and it's a great employer, and I haven't had a minute to get bored. I have spent time where I stocked, shelves and learned about merchandising for consumer goods, learned why the Kit Kat bar is at the top of the chocolate bar rack because it's one of the top selling, SKUs, and what consumer demands were. Have been able to see, certainly a business that has peaks and valleys. There's probably no more dynamic industry than the energy industry. That is both the bane of the energy industry in some cases, those extreme highs where there's been absolute booms of energy development, whether that's from a exploration development perspective or where customer demands for our products have been at all-time highs. And then as we look forward to the future and recognize that demands that our consumers have and how they want to consume energy is going to continue to change in the future, and how are we adjusting as an organization for that? So, I reflect on the different types of conversations that I get a chance to participate in, even in a single day today, but certainly if I look at the variety of conversations over, a 25-year career, and I've had very few reasons of why would I possibly want to leave. I work with great people. We get to do challenging and interesting work. And I also, I think, get to work in a company that increasingly values inclusiveness and diversity. And that's something that I'm also very interested in both participating in, and now in my role, getting an opportunity of how to be how to lead and influence in that way as well. So I can't think of, quite honestly, a better place that would give you opportunities to be able to lean in all those different dimensions.
Absolutely. Yeah, I feel exactly the same. I'm only 10 to 15 years into my career, but my gosh, like it is never boring. It even doesn't matter what discipline you're in, but yes, it definitely has opportunities for everyone. I'm thinking that, like, my next question that I really want to ask, we've almost kind of answered it, but what is the best thing about working in the energy sector? So obviously there's a lot of variety, but we are an industry that is under a very tight microscope. And, there's a lot of pressure. And like you said, the urgency to reduce our emissions and decarbonize is important. But what would be the best thing about working in the oil and gas industry? Maybe Michelle, I'll jump back to you.
Sure. I love the scope and scale of what we do, what we've been talking about so far, providing people with the energy they need, whether it's to run their businesses, heat homes, drive their families to school, go on vacation. At the core for me, access to reliable and affordable energy has the power to lift people out of poverty, advance innovation, and dramatically enhance quality of life. And that's pretty motivating. Like, I find it motivating. And at Enbridge, we've invested more than $100 billion in the last decade into very diversified energy infrastructure business. We're a little background on us. We're the largest midstream player in North America, with half of our assets south of the border. We serve 170 million people in the US and 15 million in Ontario and Quebec with natural gas. And we move 2/3 of Canada's oil export. So, we also started building our wind and solar business about 20 years ago. With Suncor. and Enbridge is a great organization with strong values of safety, integrity, respect, and inclusion. And I wanted to just kind of circle back on safety, because I made a comment before. This industry is laser focused on safety. We understand how energy works, and we're constantly challenging ourselves to be better. I just think it's an exciting time to be in this sector, with so many talented people tackling the challenges of turning these ideas into realities, driving the energy transition that we talked about, while continuing to provide the safe, reliable, affordable, and secure energy that people need.
Absolutely. If you've ever had the chance to even tour the oil sands, I got to a few years ago, and just the scale of even the equipment there is insane. I think people don't often understand the capital and, the scale of the projects up there and across the country, really. But yeah, it's very fascinating. Tina, how about you?
I feel like Michelle is reading my mind. It's awesome, and certainly our two companies do tons of work together. So it shouldn't come as a surprise that we have such similar experiences and thoughts as well. But I do think, in addition to the variety, I think you touched on, Michelle, the fact of how relevant the energy industry is, and I would actually say that's become increasingly apparent to me as I've progressed through my career and moved on to a variety of roles, and realized, I didn't realize when I finished university that I would be able to, read the newspaper, and that so many of the things that were making the headlines were things that I was getting exposure to at work, and that I knew more than quite honestly, than the average Canadian about, whether that's, from many years of conversations on a topic that would be near and dear to my colleague at Enbridge around, market access and pipeline development, whether it's around, accessible energy, for, both here in Canada, and in comparison, what it does for quality of life compared to where energy is not as accessible or as affordable. And how different that is. I think, we often take for granted how many, products. Obviously, we think often of energy around that it serves our mobility needs, that it serves like some of our heating and electricity needs. But, if we think about fossil fuels and that sort of thing, it is also an important ingredient in so many other things that, that we wear, cosmetics on my face today, and those sorts of things that are certainly not always, not always recognized. And so, yeah, relevance today with, crisis in Ukraine, the topic of energy security is so top of mind, and being able to have an appreciation, and that my work has given me exposure to those types of topics. I think is some of what I love best about being in the oil and gas industry.
Oh, absolutely. It's interesting. The title of this is really Women in Energy, but I think what you both have mentioned, it's such a privilege to be Canadian, like women in Canadian energy. I think it is a really unique position to be in. And we are definitely, advanced from a large part of the world, especially when it comes to energy security and access and reliability. But yeah, I kind of thank my stars every day that I get to work in Canadian energy. It's very exciting. I'm hoping maybe we could switch our questions to two incredible young women who I can only hope will become future women in energy professionals. Let's queue up the first one. So the first is from Taylor. She's in grade 11, and she intends to study neuroscience and behavior. So if we could get her to ask her question, that would be great.
Hello, bonjour. My name is Taylor, and I'm from Winnipeg, Manitoba. In an industry such as oil and gas, do you find that there are prejudices and biases placed on women or towards women since it has been a male-dominated field for decades? And if so, what do those biases and prejudices look like, and are they specific to the field of oil and gas, or do you find they tend to be applicable in most realms where women take on roles of leadership or just generally women in the workplace? Thank you so much. Merci beaucoup, and have a great day.
That's awesome. Who wants to take the first crack at it?
I'm happy to. Merci, Taylor, for your question. It's fantastic. And, admittedly, over 25 years, I'd say my experience as a female in a male-dominated kind of workforce have run the full spectrum from being super positive, and we've talked lots about those, but I wouldn't want to create illusions that it's always been easy. At the far end of the spectrum, if I reflect back on my career, probably in some of the most difficult, I've been a leader that's had to, both investigate, address a reported case of bullying and sexual harassment that was occurring in the workforce in a team that I was leading. So that was never a situation that I envisioned when I graduated from university and started out on my career. But, on the positive end, I've been fortunate to have fantastic male allies who've been, leaders for me, who've been mentors, who've been peers, who continue to challenge me on some of my own stereotypes and biases as well. And that have provided me, growth and certainly tons of opportunities and supported me through that journey, including dealing with, some of the experiences that have been less positive. If I look at that over the 25 years, certainly from an occurrence perspective, the positive, experiences today far outnumber the negative. And I think a lot of things have changed, obviously not just in our industry, but societal changes as well. And the oil and gas industry or the energy industry isn't immune to the societal changes that are happening. If I'm disappointed in one thing, certainly on that kind of spectrum, I am disappointed that 25 years later, women still remain underrepresented in our workforce, and particularly that they remain underrepresented in our leadership ranks. I actually think, 25 years ago when I started, I mentioned I was part of a cohort of new graduates. We were 50-50 equally split of males and females that were hired in the same year that I had at Suncor. Reflecting back in terms of who stayed, certainly there was more drop off in females earlier on, and so I think understanding what's contributing to that and how we overcome those. Certainly I look at the cohort, we were 4 of us that started in Montreal. I am now the one individual who is still with the organization and has made the leadership, ranks of our organization. So pleased to be able to be making a difference and provide some aspect of being a role model for other females, in our organization, and super grateful to those who have gone before me that have served as a role model in there. But I hope that 25 years from now, the women that are entering in our organization see a much more even split in our leadership ranks as well.
Definitely. And actually, both Suncor and Enbridge are actually leaders when it comes to representation, because we know that just participation in Canada's oil and gas sector is under 25%. It actually hasn't moved much in a decade. But both of you have more than 30% of both your board and your leadership team being female, which is funny to celebrate 30%. But to be honest, it's rare. So that part, you should be, some kudos to that. But yeah, it's a tough industry. We actually have some of the lowest representation on leadership outside of construction. So everything, like even if you think of other industries like healthcare or pharmaceuticals or anything like that, they definitely have a larger representation of women. But again, I think everyone has kind of that issue of the lack of women in decision-making roles at that leadership level. So no, it's very, very important. How about you, Michelle?
So I'm just laughing because it's so very similar. When I look back now over the decades, I do think things have changed a lot in the industry. I will share, when I was hired, my cohort that was hired on campus, and I remember joining a panel shortly after getting hired and having someone come up to me afterwards, and because I was talking about how great it was to work in the utilities, and she came up to me and said, both utilities in Ontario have been really great at hiring women. I've been in the industry for 25 years and it's really different now. And that was 25 years ago. And so we have made progress, definitely. And I think we've certainly made a lot more progress in the last 25 years than we did in the 25 before that. As I said, when I started, I was often the only woman in the room. I don't think Tina and I were in the same room enough, which could certainly be hard sometimes. We didn't have role models to look up to. We didn't have peers to commiserate with. I remember trying to find maternity FR coveralls, fire retardant coveralls, and I ended up just buying really big ones and rolling up the pant legs. And I certainly I've been through more serious situations than that as well, and I certainly didn't always feel included. But I do think things have changed a lot. I agree, in society as well as in the industry and in our companies. I think companies are truly recognizing the value of having a diverse and inclusive workplace. And I really think it's a great time to be a woman in the industry because, we're talking about it and everyone's talking about it and they're acknowledging the value of diversity. One thing I'm very proud of Enbridge for doing is setting diversity targets as part of our 2020 ESG goals. And we had a diversity dashboard even before those targets were set that was shared broadly internally. So you could actually see the numbers by area. And we are in the 30s at sort of all levels, managers, directors, 33%, and vice president, senior vice president, and we have 4 women on our board. So there's lots more to do, but I think that we've come a long way. And obviously, this isn't just about gender. Different perspectives come from whatever makes us unique. And I think those different perspectives, definitely lead to better results.
Absolutely. And actually, the stats also show that the majority of women are mostly in finance or administrative roles. So still very valuable parts of the energy industry, but to have people in corporate development and in engineering like you two, like this is the way to broaden those areas into STEM and, strategy and everything. So why don't we hear next from Sophia? So Sophia is in grade 10 and she intends to study political science. So let's hear her question.
Hi, bonjour. My name is Sophia Roy. I am a student from Collège Saint-Hubert Collegiate in Winnipeg, Manitoba. My question is, what is a piece of advice you would give to women looking to come into this industry? Have a good day.
That's great. What a great question. Tina, how about we start with you?
I guess I'll start off and say, first, if you're contemplating getting into this industry, do it. But, second, I guess if I think about my advice for women wouldn't be much different that I would share with anyone who's entering the industry, regardless of their gender. I think great advice is work hard, play hard, and be true to yourself. I think, ultimately, and I think particularly as women in a more male-dominated, workforce, it can be tempting at times to think about what do I need to do to fit in. And I think that piece around being true to yourself and being you is so valuable. I think number one, trying to be anything different is way too exhausting. That's been my own experience. It takes no effort to be yourself, but it takes a lot of effort to try to be somebody different. And my own other understanding has been that people appreciate that authenticity. And I think that's definitely contributed favorably. If I reflect on my own career development, it was true when I was an individual contributor for sure earlier on in my career. And I think it's increasingly true as you step into leadership roles. Authenticity and being genuine are so obvious, quite honestly, when we look up at leaders. And so I think it's just super important to be that, not try to be anyone else, not try to be apologetic of who you are, but jump into this industry and bring your whole self really to the work that you do. That'd be my advice.
That's great advice. And Michelle, what advice do you have?
That is great advice. And that is one that, like, I really appreciate that, because I give that advice often too, because I also think when you're not being authentic, people can tell. They may not really know why, but they can really tell. So great advice, great question too. And I will say I've been around a long time and I love to give advice. So I could keep us here all day, but I'll just maybe focus on one other thing, which is, sometimes to get to where you want to go, you need to step outside your comfort zone. And I would really encourage people to do that. So the opportunity may not be exactly what you're looking for, but, stepping outside where you're comfortable, that's how we grow. And, whether that's personally or professionally, choosing to make a change takes courage, but it's the best way to truly develop. And so what I've seen, great experiences can follow. And trying new things, it changes your perspective, it expands your diverse thinking. And it also helps you get comfortable making decisions with incomplete information, which is really a hard skill to hone and helps in the leadership ranks for sure. So I've done this many times in my career, and every time it feels so overwhelming, but ends up being super rewarding. And I remember one time early in my career, because sometimes these things come up outside what your role description might say. It's just hey, do you want to take on this opportunity? And I can think of a time when I organized a Canadian Gas Association conference, which was a ton of work on top of my full-time job. And I had to speak in front of the full audience several times, which terrified me. But I learned a lot, and I made friends in the industry that I still keep in touch with now. So, it's just a great opportunity if you're willing to take a risk.
Definitely. And I'll piggyback on that. My advice is always get involved. And I know, like, some of my most lifelong friendships now outside of my, core group of girlfriends I've had forever is now women in energy. Like, young women in energy has afforded me so many opportunities to connect with like-minded people, especially in my previous role at Spartan, where I worked on an entirely male team. So I was just looking for, other women to connect with and all that. And like you said, that didn't exist 10, 15 years ago. Like, we are still fairly new, but these networks of women, of even this peer-to-peer mentorship model and all that, of getting to know people and getting out there, that's the best way to even, I guess, figure out if you're going to join the industry or if you're going to stay and everything. So no, that's really good. Well, if we are in any, if we were ever considering whether we were in good hands, I think if I was in grade 11 and grade 10 asking those kind of questions, I think our country's in good hands now. Why don't I move on to keep asking you a couple questions? And this one comes up, I think we kind of tied into it a bit earlier, but let's talk about the term fossil fuels. So I think some people think it's a bad word, but how is the traditional oil and gas industry changing? And what role do those fossil fuels or hydrocarbons play in the energy transition? So Michelle, why don't I push it to you?
Yeah, sure. It is, we talked about this a bit. It's hard to overstate the role that fossil fuels have played in the development of the human species. Fossil fuels powered the Industrial Revolution, pulled millions out of poverty, and shaped the modern world. But now that as we started to understand the science on climate change, it was obvious that we needed to transition to low or zero carbon energy sources as quickly as possible. So I think part of the negative connotation associated with fossil fuels is due partially because of the frustration over the slow pace of change. People are looking around and thinking, We know we need to stop emitting carbon into the atmosphere. We've got plenty of renewable options. Why can't we just make the switch? And as much as I understand the frustration, like a lot of things in life, the energy transition is complicated and it can't be done quickly. We still need to heat our homes, power our electrical grids, and we've got to find a way to transition to alternative sources without disrupting supply. And fossil fuels will be an indispensable part of our lives for a while. And certainly renewable energy holds all kinds of potential and is growing quickly. There's just not enough of it yet to meet the global emission targets and satisfy the increasing demands. Bottom line, the energy system is complex and it's not particularly well integrated. So what I think we need is innovation across the entire energy value chain to introduce cleaner oil and gas into the energy mix, to reduce the emissions of existing processes, and to repurpose existing infrastructure. We talked about all of the existing infrastructure to build the energy systems that the future requires. So really, ultimately, our long-term success depends on meeting society's dual challenge to deliver more energy for a growing population in new and better ways, and to enable the low carbon future. So again, this is a challenge, and I think it's an exciting time to be in the sector. There's lots of talented people tackling this challenge and turning it into reality.
Definitely. And I always find energy transition is that word that people really get hung up on because they think it's transitioning away from something into something else. And sometimes I love the transformation conversation, but it's really about, everyone, the mix is growing. We have how many, 8 or 9 billion people in the world now. So it's actually the demand, the pie is growing. It's not one piece of pie is taken away from the other. It's everyone has more of a role to play. So yeah, no, I totally agree. Tina, how about you?
Yeah, you touched on something that's been near and dear to me as we think about, fossil fuels and the, changing landscape. And at Suncor, we've kind of adopted, rather than talking uniquely about the energy transition, talking about energy expansion. And we talk about that for a few reasons. Certainly, the energy mix is changing. It's going to continue to evolve. But it's not an either or conversation, or at least it won't be for quite some time, exactly for the reasons that Michelle spoke about, in that the complexity of what these changes are going to entail. And so, fossil fuels need to continue to be part of the solution for the foreseeable future. But we don't have our heads in the sand that fossil fuels, as it's been developed to date, needs to continue to change and evolve as well. And so how can we do exploration and get these products in ways that are lower emissions and decarbonize? We really talk about decarbonizing our base businesses. The base businesses are still needed. We need continued exploration of the oil sands and the tremendous resource that we have here in Canada. We need refined products here, in North America for a long time. They fuel, as I said, everything from, our needs of mobility. One of the fun facts I probably neglected to mention, I always think when you think of some of the most, what do fossil fuels get used for? One of my favorite fun facts from the couple of years I spent at lubricants at the time was that our food grade white oils there actually go into things that we eat, like gummy bears. And I'm like, I love gummy bears. Like, who knew that those are in the gummy bears that I, occasionally grab my snack, satisfy my snack cravings. But, it's not just about our conventional fossil fuel products. When we think about energy expansion, we're looking for how do we step into and leverage the expertise that, that the energy industry has in areas that are adjacent to our current lines of business. And so, we look at areas like how we can expand into renewable fuels, whether that be renewable diesels, sustainable aviation fuel, whether that's hydrogen, and starting to step into the increasingly more green. And in fact, in the world of hydrogen, they talk about almost every color of the rainbow, from blue hydrogen, green hydrogen, turquoise. I think there's now pink and gold or so many other colors. But, we have expertise. We deal with hydrogen in our operations. We are, one of the largest consumers of hydrogen. We need a lot of heat for a lot of our production processes. And so we can lend that expertise and step into these adjacent lines, of business to provide new solutions, both that are going to be important and critical to our base businesses, but be important parts of the future and ever evolving, changing, energy needs. Power, both Michelle and I have talked about spending time in, renewable power and wind and solar. But it is mind-boggling when we talk about the scale of what even renewable development, power development needs to be to completely, if you talk about completely offsetting what fossil fuels does and provides to globally, you can't build it fast enough. The grids can't can't possibly evolve quick enough. There isn't enough precious metals being, mined and developed to be able to build all of the solar panels you would want. So there's going to be constantly new challenges in front of us that are going to create great opportunities for folks who are going to continue their career long after I will hopefully have retired. But yeah, I see it as a really either or conversation versus a, that it's a yes, it's a yes and conversation instead of an either or conversation, I guess I should say.
Oh, definitely. And so I think we're almost, there's Francis.
Yes, hi there. Thank you three very, very much. I guess one of the questions that's going through my mind is, when are the three of you going to become the CEOs of your companies? I mean, as far as I know, there is only one woman who is the CEO of a major energy company, and that is Susanna Pierce at Shell Canada. And quite frankly, that's their third female CEO. So bravo, Shell Canada. And another recent improvement is the new head of CAP, the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers, is a woman, the first time, and not an oil and gas or energy woman either. She comes from a pension background, an insurance background. When you say pension, I mean the Canada Pension Plan. So this is a huge step forward, and I think will help in the communications about the industry with consumers. But now it's my responsibility to ask the three of you, or to make three statements and ask you to fill in the blanks with one or two words and then a question. So let's start with Michelle. So Michelle, when you're confused, what do you do?
I ask questions. I ask a lot of them. I need to get to the bottom of it. And so my family sometimes compares me to an investigative journalist because I ask so many questions.
Oh, good. And Tina, what do you do when you're confused?
Yeah, quite similar. I guess I get curious in terms of trying to seek understanding, and I tend to read a lot. I tend to research. I tend to confer with folks who might have the answer, but probably very similar to Michelle.
Good. And Katie, what do you do when you're confused?
Exactly the same. Get curious, ask questions. The one thing is just knowing that I can ask what someone would consider a dumb question. It's just a level setting question where then we get all on the same page. So I'm happy to be the one that has to put up their hand and ask those questions to get everyone, not
Good
confused anymore.
That's right. Clarify the matter. Mm-hmm. Yes. Okay. So now when the three of you are scared, what do you do? Tina?
I probably seek advice. I think from people I trust, because I think often being scared comes from somewhere where I don't have confidence. And so, seeking advice to reinforce what I'm thinking and test what I'm thinking.
Thank you. And Michelle, when you're scared?
I kick into crisis mode. I assess the situation, start planning for contingencies. I think years of emergency response training and practice have done that for me. So.
Thank you. Katie, are you ever scared? And what do you do when you are?
Oh, always. I feel like I push through it, but I go back to my, what I call my cheerleaders, all of my close friends that you know that you need them to really raise you up at that moment. So I have a couple people on speed dial.
Lovely. Now, what if you are sad? How do we deal with sadness? Michelle?
I hug my family, my husband, my kids, if they'll let me, and then of course my dogs, for sure. They're always happy to be hugged.
Love those dogs. Tina, how about you when you're sad?
I cry. And quite honestly, I used to hate that because I thought it was a real sign of weakness. But I've actually come to accept that it just shows I'm human, and it makes me feel better once I can kind of get that out of my system.
Right. Katie, what about you?
I've had to learn that I just need to take the time to be sad and just remove myself from the situation and just reflect on it. And that's what has been most helpful for me.
Well, thank you for sharing what you do in those situations, because we all find ourselves at different times and sometimes repeatedly in some of those situations. So your answers are very, very helpful. Now, this is the Famous Five Foundation's virtual pink tea. So we would like to know what you think Canada's Democratic champions would be doing if they were alive today. Michelle, what do you think the Famous Five would do?
So two things come to mind for me. So given the topic today, I think they would be instrumental in driving a rational, affordable global energy transition. And then the second would be, I think they'd be focused on inclusion and bringing society together in these challenging times.
Yeah, even more so, hopefully. And Tina, what do you think they would do?
Yeah, I admire them tremendously, and hopefully, get the opportunity sometimes to espouse some of what I think they would do, which would be to use their voices and actions to amplify those who may not be able to, or who are afraid to speak up, for themselves. And whether that's folks who are younger, folks who are less experienced, underrepresented, disadvantaged. But yeah, I think they give voice to those who may not have voices for themselves.
Thank you. And Katie, what's your interpretation of the Famous Five?
I think they would be cheerleading all the progress we've made in multiple industries, and just the women that are on the cusp of being that wave of new female leadership and diverse professionals that are coming in to add to diversity of thought. I think they would be championing it, screaming it from the mountaintops for us. So
thank you. I tend to think they would all be CEOs of different types of energy companies and bring us all together, right? So thank you. Yeah, thank you very much for that. Well, dear friends, we're at a virtual pink tea, and it's now time to say thank you to these three remarkable leaders whom we've met today. I hope you've brought a teacup or a glass or a mug so that we can toast these women as our way of saying thank you. And first, I'd like us to say thanks to Tina Ackermans for her enthusiastic and informative presentation today. Thank you, Tina, too, for the role that you're playing at Suncor in terms of encouraging and providing cleaner energy, in encouraging more renewable energies to come to the source, and also for promoting women in senior positions and to being a wonderful role model. And so if we might raise our glasses and toast Tina, to Tina Ackermans.
Cheers.
Thank you, Tina. And our thanks to Michelle George. Michelle, we really appreciate you sharing so honestly and openly your leadership journey with us today, and for adding the voice within Enbridge to continue to develop, to evolve as a company, but a company that also takes into consideration, as does Suncor and many other energy companies, some of the values of society, some of the goals that are not necessarily traditionally part of a balance sheet. And so our thanks to Michelle George for her participation and leadership today. To Michelle. We hope the two of you keep climbing up that corporate ladder, and that in a few years we read new CEOs. But we have no doubt that our virtual pink tea host is certainly on the way to the top of the ladder. At the age that you are already, Katie, and to be involved with organizing significant women's organizations and industry organizations is huge. So thank you for that. And thank you for leading the discussion today, which was so intelligent, so informative, and I think brought to light a different aspect of the energy industry, which we also need to consider. And so to our dynamic young woman in energy, to Katie. So I'm going to say thank you again to the three of you and ask the talented Encore team to take you off screen. You've been on for 45 minutes. That's a long time. So much, much appreciated. And the fact that the three of you are going to join us in the après pink tea is wonderful. So just in a few minutes. But now I'm going to bring some news specific to the Famous Five Foundation. And the first piece is that on Tuesday, June the 7th, we're going to celebrate the 105th anniversary of the first women in the British Empire being able to vote, to seek elected office, and to serve in elected office. Although Alberta was the third province to grant women provincial franchise, we were the first province to hold an election on June 7th that elected Louise McKinney as an independent, who became one of the Famous Five, and also Lieutenant Roberta McAdams, a dietitian who was serving in the armed forces as head chief dietitian of a military hospital in London, England. And they are the first two women to be elected by men and women in the British Empire. So on Tuesday, June the 7th, please, please raise a toast for them. And think about the struggle that went in to securing the right for women to have the vote. Now, just last night, we Ontario concluded their provincial election. And I don't know whether more women were elected or not. Hopefully more were elected to their legislature to become MPPs. And our thanks goes out to all the women who stood as candidates and who worked in the campaigns to elect any of the candidates. But sadly, only 43% of Ontarians who could vote did vote. So as our way of bringing the issue of suffrage into the current light, we're touring the maquette, which is a miniature of the women or persons monuments that are present in Calgary and Olympic Plaza and in front of the Senate in Calgary. And we're touring it to provincial legislatures, to city halls over the next 2.5 years. Right now it's in Edmonton at the legislature. Please come and visit the Famous Five there before the end of June. And then Premier Stephenson, one of two female premiers in Canada, has invited us to visit the Manitoba legislature. And so we'll be there from July 1st until the end of September. And then we'll be going to various places in Ontario, Quebec, and the Atlantic provinces. Well, our next virtual pink tea, our next Famous Five Friday together with women from across Canada will happen on July the 8th. And at that time, we will honor an incredible human rights activist by the name of Viola Desmond. Of course, you can find her on your $10 bill, but there is so much more to her story. And we're thrilled that a remarkable woman whose story is also inspiring will lead us in a tribute to Viola and how she gained a free pardon. I didn't know there were pardons and free pardons, but we'll learn more about that on July the 8th. So now to our last toast. And the last toast is to each and every one of us, because we are leaders too. Yes, you are a leader. You're a leader in your life. You're a leader for other people, whether you know them or not. So I would like you to say in a strong, clear, and very sincere voice, to me, I'm a leader too. So shoulders back, deep breath. This is a serious toast. Let's say, to me, I'm a leader too. To me, I'm a leader too. So thank you all for joining us today. Special thanks to our fantastic panelists who will be joining us in just a moment. I just saw the link go through for the après-tea. So I hope you will join us there. And if not, continue to lead. Oh, I forgot to say thank you to the young leaders. So the young leaders, to Taylor, to Sophia, and to Kelly. Thank you too. I'll quickly sneak in another toast. Thank you too. Keep leading, young'uns. The future is bright thanks to you. So we'll see you in July. Thank you very much. Merci. Miigwech.
Have you ever had a conversation with someone and felt like they weren't listening? Like maybe they didn't even care about what you had to say? Not so long ago, life was a bit like that for women in Canada. They weren't allowed to vote. And if they spoke out and voiced their opinions, they could even be sent to jail. It was a time when women had more fear and less freedom, more rules and fewer rights. But 5 courageous Albertan women came together and changed it all. How, you might ask? Over a cup of tea. That's right, a cup of tea. But more on that in a minute. Almost 100 years ago, Emily Murphy, Irene Parlby, Nellie McClung, Louise McKinney, and Henrietta Muir Edwards were fed up with the way things were. Emily Murphy was the first female magistrate in Canada and wanted to be appointed to the Senate. But since she was a woman, she wasn't eligible. The law at the time said it was a position for persons, a word which somehow didn't include women. The women who would become known as the Famous Five set out to change that. But since women were strongly discouraged from getting together and talking about politics, the Famous Five set up what they called pink teas. The name was a great disguise. People assumed that they were just having dainty tea parties, but in reality, they were planning their strategy to move forward gender equality in Canada. All the planning and work that occurred during the pink teas led to the Famous Five's first petition to the Supreme Court of Canada. It was not to be that easy. Their petition was rejected. But they weren't giving up. They decided to approach the highest possible court authority at the time, the Privy Council of England. And on October 18th, 1929, an amazing thing happened. The Famous Five's petition led to the ruling that women were included as persons under law. These 5 courageous women changed the course of history in Canada and the Commonwealth and paved the way for women to be considered equal in all aspects of life. Generations later, their actions continue to inspire Canadian women to be ambitious, adventurous, and famous. Today, the Famous Five Foundation works to create a society where every voice is heard, valued, and has the power to challenge and conquer injustice.